If you load for the Creedmoor-Class of cartridges like 6.5 Creedmoor, you're familiar with short stick powders like H4350. But what if you could get similar or better performance with a ball powder? That's what we're going to explore in this video. Gavin here from UltimateReloader.com. When I found out about Winchester StaBALL 6.5, I was intrigued and I was definitely excited. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video, is my first experiences with StaBALL 6.5, some data that I've collected, some shooting that I've done, and so on and so forth. StaBALL 6.5 is a ball powder, and it's right in that burn rate that's optimal for the Creedmoor-Class of cartridges. I've got a lot of these. I've got the Howa 1500 6mm Creed custom rebarrel job that you saw here on the channel. I've got a 25 Creedmoor here that I just built, great shooting rifle, and I've got 3 6.5 Creed rifles. I've got the Ruger precision rifle. I recently did an accurizing story on that, got that down to quarter MOA under the best circumstances, really great results with that. I've got a Uintah precision bolt action upper for the AR-10 platform, and I've got a CMMG Endeavor 6.5 Creed AR-10 style rifle. So I load a lot of this Creedmoor-Class type ammunition, and while powders like H4350 meter well, in my experience, ball powders meter just a bit better, and that can make all the difference when you're cranking out ammunition on a progressive reloading press. So let's take a look at Winchester StaBALL 6.5 in depth. The first thing I want to do is to take a look at the relative burn rate chart and to take a look at where StaBALL 6.5 falls compared to some of the other popular powders for loading this Creedmoor-Class of cartridges. So as we look at the right-hand column here, so this goes from fastest to slowest, and there's nothing real exact about the relative burn rate chart. There are no units for burn rate, and there are many different parameters that affect the way a powder burns: temperature, pressure, and so on and so forth. But what you can say with enough laboratory data is one powder burns just a little bit faster overall than another one. So what we're focused on over here is this right-hand column. That's where the Creedmoor-Class of powders, smokeless powders, falls. And if we look at where H4350 is, H4350 is a short stick powder. It's a part of Hodgdon's Extreme lineup. It has been considered sort of the de facto standard for cartridges like 6.5 Creedmoor, and that's what I started loading 6.5 Creedmoor with, and I've probably loaded Creedmoor cartridges with H4350 more than any other powder off the top of my head. We go a little bit slower on the chart actually to land at StaBALL 6.5. And what's interesting is it's right next to the collection of powders where N555 falls, but N555 is actually just a little bit slower yet. And in general, if you're going with lighter bullets for a cartridge, you're going to typically go with a little bit faster powder. And if you're going with heavier bullets, you're going to go with a slightly slower powder. If you go all the way to a Magnum cartridge like 300 Win Mag or 300 PRC, you're going to be really, really low on this right-hand column in that slower category of powders. So StaBALL 6.5 is going to be a little bit slower than H4350, and that means that we're going to want to favor it for the sort of middle of that bell curve of bullet weights, or bullets that fall a little bit on the heavier side of what would be in the middle. For this story, I wanted to take sort of a first stab look at powder weight or mass density. And so what I did was I collected some data from powder manufacturers, and then I got out my scale. This is not a precision scale, and I've got a auto body paint mixing cup here that I used. It's graduated. It's got 100 milliliter increments on the side, and I decided to just compare 200 milliliters of each powder and to take a look at the weights of each. I compared that to what I found published both publicly and privately from powder manufacturers, and the results were actually pretty consistent. But I will note that the way you fill a container with powder will affect its density. Hence drop tubes for getting higher density and more powder into a particular case when you're reloading. And here's where things lie. If we consider N555, which is the least dense powder, to be at 100% density, we would go up to about 105% for H4350 and about 110% for Winchester StaBALL 6.5. So what you want to think about here is the specifics for your load. If you're looking for a hotter load and you need more density, a powder like StaBALL 6.5 is going to be a great option. If you're somewhere in the middle, a powder like H4350 is going to be great. Near 100% case capacity or slightly compressed is actually a good thing for consistency. And if your load calls for it, N555 could be the right powder. It all depends on what load you're chasing and what you're developing for. As a quick review, I want to cover the observations I recently made when I put these three powders under a 400 power Wi-Fi digital microscope. Very interesting to take a look at the individual granules side by side at that magnification. We can see size, we can see the shape, we can see the color and the surface texture. Very, very interesting stuff. It turns out it's difficult to develop and manufacture a temperature insensitive powder that is a ball powder, and somehow Winchester managed to do it. Pretty awesome stuff. And one of the surprises that I had was, because we've got three different density levels here, high, medium, and low, I expected N555 to have the largest granules, and that wasn't the case. Let's go over these from small to large. StaBALL 6.5 was the smallest with a diameter of 31.3 thousandths of an inch. N555 fell in the middle with a stick length of 43 thousandths, and H4350 was the longest with a stick length of 54.7 thousandths of an inch. Just goes to show you can't always make assumptions that you think might be true. Next, let's talk about hands-on testing. I did some loading and some shooting with StaBALL 6.5. If you watched my 25 Creedmoor load development 1.0 video, I mentioned StaBALL 6.5 because I saw some discussion about it online and I felt like it would be a good vehicle to achieve my goals. So I've only got one bullet right now in 25 caliber that's suitable for the 25 Creedmoor, and that's the 131 grain Ace from Blackjack Bullets. Great bullet. This thing has been phenomenally accurate in my more in-depth testing. And the interesting thing here was I had some anecdotal load data from a discussion thread, I think it was on snipershide.com. So I kind of had to read between the lines and sort of make up my own load data. And I think I was a little bit on the hot side, even though I didn't see pressure signs. So I guess that is actually a good thing. I started out at 43.2 grains and ended up at 44 grains. Now, I wasn't going for accuracy testing when I'm testing powders like this. I'm taking an approach more like a lot of the OEMs do with their load data development, right? For load data books and that kind of thing. Looking at the velocity and looking at the consistency of the velocity, and then in my case, checking for any signs. I did shoot some groups. I shot some with the chronograph, and I shot some with the suppressor. It just kind of depended on what I was doing at the time. So velocity started out at 2846 feet per second for the 43.2 grain charge and topped out at 2919 for the 44 grain charge. And I'm thinking, this is a bit hot. I might be missing some interesting nodes down below these velocities in the low to mid 2800 feet per second range. SD and ES numbers varied widely. It looked like the 43.8 grain charge was best with a standard deviation of 6.8 feet per second and an extreme spread of 13 feet per second. For next steps, I've got a couple things. Berger just announced their 135 grain 25 caliber bullet. That would be an interesting one to test, and then also look at lower velocities in this weight range for charge weight just below what I was testing. So after the 25 Creedmoor testing, I decided to test 6.5 Creedmoor. It's the most popular Creedmoor-Class cartridge, and I know a lot of you are interested in performance results and testing summary data from 6.5 Creedmoor. I chose two bullets, Hornady's 135 grain A-tip bullet and Berger's 140 grain hybrid bullet. For the 135 grain A-tip testing, I started at 44 grains and I ended up at 45 grains. Here was my philosophy here. Take Hodgdon's published load data and work my way up to the max charge in increments of 0.5 grains and to shoot 3 strings of 3 shots each. So we had 44, 44 and a half, and 45 grains for the 135 grain A-tip. And what was interesting was I saw a familiar pattern with both the 135 grain A-tip and the 140 grain hybrid, and that was best results at max charge. The max charge was 45 grains for the 135 grain A-tip. We had 2839 feet per second, an SD of 4.3 feet per second, and an extreme spread of 8 feet per second. This load also produced the tightest 3-shot group at about 3/8 of an inch. Very, very good stuff. Bumping our way up to the 140 grain hybrid, the max charge was 44 grains, Hodgdon published. So we went with 43, 43 and a half, and 44. And in a similar manner, we had SDs 14-ish, and we had extreme spreads in the mid to upper 20s of feet per second. Just like with the 135, the 44 grain load produced a standard deviation of 4.7 feet per second and an extreme spread of 9 feet per second, almost identical to what we saw with the max charge for the 135 grain A-tip load. I shot a 5-shot group that was just under a half-inch suppressed. That was through medium levels of mirage, and it looks like that particular load was going to shoot really well with further testing. What I discovered in the end is that my work is not done yet. I got some really great results with StaBALL 6.5, but there's a couple things that I have left to do. First is temperature sensitivity testing. This is something that I've thought about for a long time, and I just ordered some gear for. It's going to take a little bit to get equipped for this, but I think this will be a really interesting format for these types of stories. Powder shootouts, tested stories, that kind of thing. I just saw a video published by Johnny's Reloading Bench for his 6.5 StaBALL story. He did one approach. I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I'm somewhere between the methodology that Hodgdon uses internally and what the military specifies for their testing. Really, really interesting stuff. The second thing is I'm going to go towards the heavier classes of bullets for the 6.5 Creedmoor, for instance, in my testing. For any of the Creedmoor classes, really. Because with a slower relative burn rate, I think this powder is going to really, the full performance potential will really come out in those particular scenarios. So the Berger 153 and a half, got some of those that I've just started to work with. The Berger 156 hunting bullet, you know, those would be great bullets to work with to see how StaBALL 6.5 is going to do in that heavier class of bullet weight. So there you go, my initial results with StaBALL 6.5. I have a feeling this is going to become one of those powders that I use on a frequent basis. I would love to know how this powder has been working for you. Have you been loading with it for 6 Creed, for 25 Creed, for 6.5 Creed? I'd love to know what kind of performance you're getting and what kind of experiences you're having with your equipment. Rotating drum powder measures, slide bar powder measures like what's on the Dillon. I've got a lot more testing to do, and I'm really excited to continue working with this particular powder. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications because I've got a ton of tested stories coming out specifically for smokeless powders. Also, links in the video description. If you click on that first link, it'll link to an article with more information about StaBALL 6.5, links to product pages, and so on and so forth. I'm on Patreon. I've got Ultimate Reloader shirts at the Ultimate Reloader store. Links in the video description. As always, thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Until next time, happy shooting and happy reloading.